So I want to, I guess Phil will call us back, I guess.
Okay, we're back.
Welcome. So I want to welcome Reverend Neti for to our Sangha. She's an old, longtime member of our Sangha, as well as being a teacher at Twining Vines, a founding teacher there, and an absolute gift. She's practiced both in our Diamond Sangha lineage and in the Soto lineage, and been able to get full transmission in the Soto lineage, and has been authorized to teach by Danielle in the past. She has a tremendous depth of practice and heart and integrity and wisdom, and I'm really grateful she's willing to share her time and attention with us. Thank you, Reverend Neti, for talking with us.
Thank you, Mike. And nice to see Jack with us too from Twining Vines in Australia. Good to see you all. Years ago, early in my practice, I heard this
Still
fable.
can't hear anybody. Ah.
I think somebody needs to mute.
So I'm going to mute them, and then I'm going to go help them offline.
Good. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, years ago I heard a fable, and I've never been able to locate it, but I wanted, even though I can't really remember the details, I wanted to share a bit about it, because the theme of the fable is that absolutely nothing we do is wasted. And so the way that the fable went is, it was a story of a woman who was a refugee, and she kept being moved from one country to another, or one location to another, one camp to another. And each time she moved, she had to she started a new set of skills. Whatever she'd been doing in the before, she could no longer do. And in the next place, a different set of needs were required. And so she acquired a new set of skills. And this went on for years and years. And the story, you kind of feel very sad and stressed for her, that she becomes an expert in something and then gets moved along. And then all of a sudden she can't be an expert in that thing anymore. And then the way the story comes together is eventually she gets back to her homeland. Everything is in disarray in her homeland. And all these different skills that she'd learnt over the years but had to drop all came into play at once. And she was able to kind of like become the prime minister or something like that back in her land. You know, the reason I can't make up the story is because the logic is all these particular skills that she learned come together in this particular way. So if anyone happens to know that story, I've often looked it up, but I've got no key words to find it. So I don't know how to find it. But the effect it had on me was to do everything that I do really wholeheartedly, just totally do whatever I'm doing and just do it. Give all my attention to it and just do it. And not do it for what it's going to provide later, because it might not provide anything later. Like in that particular fable, it did all work out. But along the way in that story, the woman had no idea whether any of her prior skills would ever get to come back into play again. But because it's a story they do. And so I've just been thinking about that. I've been thinking about how do we engage with the present moment that we're in, just completely wholeheartedly. And really, in a lot of ways, this is just the foundation of our practices, about how to be aware, how to pay attention in this very moment that we're in, and to value this very moment that we're in as the most precious thing ever. Suzuki Roshi describes it as like a flashing in the dark sky, this incredible flash of light. in the dark sky, just illuminates the whole sky for a second. The sky is completely illuminated by this present moment that we're in. And if we treat each moment with that kind of preciousness and give our attention to it, I think we have a deep feeling of satisfaction, irrespective of whether things actually turn out, that whatever we put our effort into, whether it transpired to go the way we wanted to or not. The reward's right there. The reward's just in valuing this very present moment. And I guess the reason this is hard for us is because we get enamored by our thoughts, and our thoughts are fine. And they're not any problem at all if we particularly notice that we are having them in the present moment and we choose to put our energy there. Like right now, I want to plan my day, for example. And we're consciously aware that in this present moment, we are planning our day. This is fine thing to do, but a lot of the time people are thinking about something in the past or in the future while they're doing something in the present, and their attention is divided across this range of things and not given fully to any of them. The mind isn't given fully to what one's doing, and it's even not given fully to what one's thinking. It's kind of split between vaguely thinking about something, or just like caught up thinking about something while doing something else, and maybe not even fully noticing that we're sort of repeating a particular thought over and over and over, or playing out some scenario over and over. So it's not that all of us here are not very aware of this teaching. I mean, it's really very fundamental. But I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think it might be because I'm here on my land. As some of you know, I live part-time in Canberra, which is the capital city in Australia, and part-time on this remote piece of land that's off the grid. And I'm doing a lot of work on the land, and sometimes I do work that turns out not to be useful. And I've just, like the other day, I'm building a little mud brick cottage, and I've dug all the foundations for the concrete footings to be poured. And then I decided to put in a whole lot of drainage channels, and it was a huge amount of labor. It was just like hours and hours of extremely hard physical work using crowbars and pickaxes and shovels, and with really hard kind of clay. Very hard, many days doing it for quite a few hours every day. And then the person who's going to pour the concrete came along and looked at it and said, "Oh yeah, no, you don't do any of the drainage before you pour the concrete. You're gonna have to fill all of that back in." And it was just like, okay, all right, I'll fill it all back in. And it's not just filling it back in, like it's not just throwing dirt back into all those trenches. You have to pound all that dirt down with a crowbar to make it really compacted so that the cement will have a good foundation. So it's just as hard work to put all the dirt back as it was to take it all out. So that's what I'm doing, like an hour a morning of that before it gets hot, of pounding dirt back in with a crowbar. But I think if my attitude had been, I don't really want to be digging this trench, I'm digging because I have to, it's so hard, I wish it was easier. If I had that attitude, then I would have felt really disappointed and maybe even angry at the world when the concreting guy just said, "Oh no, don't do that, you've got to do that afterwards, just fill those all back up again." I could have had a whole lot of really agitated feelings. But the better way to think about it, I'm glad this is what I did, was like, oh yeah, it's just not a problem. I mean, I like being fit, and doing all of that work was making me fit. I mean, it's very good for my muscle building. So like, why complain? I got to do a whole lot of, hard workout, and people often pay to go to a gym to do that. And I just getting to do it right there on the land. So And also that sense of just enjoying, if I'm going to do something, all of us, I think, if we have this attitude that I am volitionally doing whatever I'm doing, if I'm doing something, I'm choosing to do it. And if we really function with that sense of volition, then we can just feel satisfied with what we're doing. And volition, I think, is an interesting thing, because in one way, we superficially don't have volition. For example, in our employment, if our boss is telling us to do a particular thing, in a way, there superficially we don't have volition. But in another way, we still are choosing to remain in that job, or wanting to care for our family, so wanting to earn an income so we can care for them. It's not very often that we truly have no volition whatsoever. To be an extreme situation to say you've got no volition. And I think on some essential level, we always have volition. But just in a general sense, if we do each thing that we do with a sense of, I'm choosing to do this, and I'm going to give myself wholeheartedly to it. I'm just going to completely do it. I just burn myself up completely and just do it. I think life is really worth living when we do that. And it doesn't actually matter too much what it is we're doing and whether there's a very positive outcome from it. We just do it fully. I think that's why I like that fable so much. I wish I could find it. Because the woman just wholeheartedly did whatever she was doing. At one point, she was a seamstress, and another time she ended up cooking, and another time she was helping coordinate people in the camp, as sort of like a mediator, facilitator of just problem solving in the camp. She just kept on having to take on these different roles, and she just wholeheartedly did them all. And then everything got blown apart, and all of that got lost. And off to another location, and then another set of things are required, and she had no disappointment. There's a dog scratching at my door. I'm just going to have to let the dog in because it won't stop scratching. Hold on a second. Sit. Sit. I wrote a few notes, so let me just see what I've got written down here. Yeah. I like the image of a mirror, and thinking of our mind as being like a mirror that just receives everything. It doesn't discriminate, it just receives everything. And it isn't hurt by the things it receives. It's not wounded by what it receives. It just receives everything and reflects back without distortion. I think if we really treat the present moment like that here I am in this moment and I've got this around me, each of us has whatever we have around us, and just to wholeheartedly receive it. Not pick and choose about it, just receive it wholeheartedly. And then if we do that first, if we be like a mirror where we receive everything and not be broken by it, not be bruised by it, just receive it. If we do that, then we can apply our vow and our precepts on how to proceed next, like what to do next. But in the first instance, I think it's skillful to be like a mirror that just receives it all. Just receives it all. Another example just from the land here. Yesterday, I arrived from Canberra, and we have a lot of very tall grasses, and these are all sort of introduced species that have become kind of problematic for the native plants, and big blackberry bushes, and they just get huge. And I've been, every day that I'm down here, I try to put in an hour or two of using a brush cutter, which I think in the States is called a weed whacker. And it's quite physically demanding, sort of slashing back and forth, slashing back and forth. So I try to do a few hours of that if I can most days to kind of get some of these blackberries and tall reeds under control, because we'll plant an orchard and let some of the natives come back as well. So I've been doing that. And then when I got here, a man had arrived with a huge machine. This sometimes happens in our valley when someone arrives with a huge machine to do work for roadworks or something. They often contact the locals and say, does anyone want some work done, seeing we've got this machine up here? And so they'd come into our property, and my son had said, yes, you could do some slashing. That would be fantastic. So when I got here, he'd been slashing for 2 hours of work at $130 an hour. He just did this huge amount of slashing that would have taken me, I don't know, a month or something to do. And I could have looked at the sort of meager amount that I'd done in comparison and thought like, oh God, it would have been so much better if I hadn't wasted all that time last week doing all of that myself. Because now this man's come, and the area that took me maybe 8 hours, he took maybe 5 minutes to do. You know, it would be easy to have a reaction like that. I think a lot of us do that a lot of the time. But if we wholeheartedly do whatever we're doing, then there's just no regrets. There's just no regrets whatsoever. We're just doing what we're doing, and we're choosing to do it, and we're giving all our attention to it. And then what comes next is just what comes next. And there's no need for us to be rewarded by a result. I think maybe that's the point I'm trying to get to. We don't need to be rewarded later for what we're doing now. We're doing something now. This is all there is to it. And if there's a reward later, that's a bonus. But that's all it is. It's a bonus. You know, if I plant seeds in the garden and they sprout, the sprout is a bonus. The planting is just what I'm doing. I'm just planting, putting it in the soil, covering it up, adding some fertilizer, organic, of course, watering it, mulching. End of story. That's all I'm doing. And then if a week later, little carrots start popping up, there you go. It's a bonus. That's nice. But if the sun scorched the seed and it didn't come up, then that's okay too. Yeah. I think it's this thing too about enjoying doing what we're doing, just really enjoying it and appreciating that we have the capacity to do things. Most of us have got a fair amount of freedom, and we can do all sorts of things. We can go shopping and cook food and choose what clothes to wear and who to talk to, where to be. To really appreciate that. One other little story I'll share is a long time ago, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, my partner and I built a house with our own hands and with the assistance of the whole universe, but we didn't employ builders, so we built it ourselves in that sense and lived in it for a long time. Built a farm, a permaculture farm, and then I went to America for just under 20 years, and we had people just sort of squatting, but we were happy for them to be squatting to be staying here and caring for the property. So like caretakers, but it was just all informal. It just kind of happened. But all of it, the whole, everything got destroyed in the fires 4 years ago. And 2 weeks before the fires came through, I'd paid somebody to clean the house because there'd been no one in it for a while, and a window or two had broken, which meant some animals had come in, and, you know, it kind of got itself all in a bit of disarray. So I paid someone to clean the whole house. So I was in the States, so I couldn't do it. And then the fires came and just burnt it completely. So nothing was left. It was just the roofing iron and the slow combustion stove, just the things made of metal were just left, but everything else completely and utterly burnt to ash. And I remember feeling really glad that I'd paid someone to clean the house before it got burnt down. It just felt like a lovely thing that a little bit of caring energy had gone into the house before it got burned. Rather than the other thought of that was a waste. You know, you could think that was a waste. And I contacted the woman who did it and just said, I just want you to know I'm so glad that you did it. Now, she really appreciated that because she kind of felt like, oh, like it helped reframe it for her as well, that it hadn't been a waste of her energy either, that it had been a really wonderful thing that the house got given this respect and care before it passed away. Yeah. So there are some things that I could read, but how are we doing for time? Kind of be interested to have some conversation on this theme if people are up for it. This idea of nothing that we do is wasted when we give ourselves wholeheartedly to it. Would anyone like to say something?
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
I'll try. Not really sure how my thoughts are together too well here, but I think that was interesting what you're saying about doing you know, just no matter what, just do it with, put everything into it, I think is what you're saying. And for some reason I'm thinking, what about how does morality and all fit into this? You said do whatever it is, no matter what it is, just do it with, put your heart into it, do it everything you've got. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. It's just sort of what about that? Any thoughts?
Yes. Yeah, yes. Yeah, I guess we don't want to just randomly do any old thing.
Right.
Because that would cause harm. But I do what I've noticed is if I'm being very present minded and really attending to the present moment, I'm less likely to have harmful thoughts in the first place. I think the reason people have harmful thoughts that then translate into harmful action is because they're listening to ideas in their mind that they've acquired, and we all do it to some extent, and some more so than others, that we've acquired a mistaken view about ourselves or about others, and we're listening to that when we act in a way that causes harm. And one thing I found very helpful as a way, like a compass for myself, is if ever my thoughts start to feel a little constricted, a little mean-spirited in some way, or frustrated in some way, something like that, or maybe even arrogant in some way, when a thought like that starts to happen, I think of that as like, oh, my compass has gone off, my vow. It's gone off my sense of ethics. Somehow it's gone off a little bit. So whenever my thoughts are uncomfortable, I take full responsibility for that it's me. There's something about my thinking right now that's not right, that's not wholesome. And I try and pause and try and think, okay, I'm trying to make something happen that's not going to happen. That's why I'm frustrated. For example, I want someone to do something and they're not doing it, and so I'm frustrated. That's pretty common. So I let that be. So that's an example of being very aware in the present moment of my thoughts. So I think if we're very present-minded, not just of the environment that we're in, what's in front of us, but very aware of the thoughts that we're having. When people really do that, I think we act in more wholesome ways. I think we act in more wholesome ways. I think when people do things that are harmful, it's because they're not actually paying full attention to really what's going on. They're preoccupied with preconceived notions about the other, usually the other person, or it could just be about themselves. Like people are always trying to take advantage of me or some thought like that. So they react in a particular way because they've got a preconceived idea. I don't know, what are your thoughts? Does that resonate at all?
I think, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, it does resonate for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I mean, if we just could pay full attention all the time, we'd probably just be fully awakened, because all the other things, all the teachings would just become apparent to us, like that we're all interconnected, that I don't exist as a separate self, that everything is in a constant state of flux. These core teachings, all of them are actually there for us to see. If we give our full attention, they're self-evident, they're right in front of us. All the core teachings are just available to us just through our own observation. But we are raised with a lot of views that are only superficially true. They're not essentially true, they're just superficially true. And we often just stop at that superficial understanding. And when we stop at that superficial understanding, then we're likely to do harm. Yeah. But if we slow down and just quieten down, then we can see past the superficial. Like the superficial understanding is that this is a glass of water and that's the end of the story. That's reasonable. But there's so much more going on. How did it get to be here? What is it made of? Why do I call it a glass of water and not something else? Like, there's so much more going on if we slow down and just inquire. I think this too is why Zazen is the foundation of our practice, because Zazen really teaches us to slow right down and become very observant in a subtle way. We don't need a whole lot of stimulus. We can maintain awareness with just very little stimulus. And that allows us to really quieten our mind and become very observant in very subtle ways. Yeah, thank you for your question. Carol, did you want to say something?
Yes, I do. How is this relevant to the child who is being bombed in Gaza today?
Yeah. Well, I think for the people who are doing the bombing, they're not doing what we've just been talking about. They're not responding to the bare facts right in front of them. You know, if people, unfortunately, I think this happens so much in war that people hear the propaganda and don't see what's right in front of them. So They're paying attention to a very, very narrow, blinkered way of making sense. And one could say people choose to do that. And others could say, if I was in the same circumstances, then maybe I'd do exactly the same thing as them. But for the
Was
child,
actually, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, for the child themselves, or for the doctor in the hospital, or the mother with her child. Yeah. How do they survive it? I think the way to survive it, and I can only talk from the experience of the hardships I've had in my own life, which obviously are minor by comparison, but to be completely with exactly what is happening, to just be with it, just be with what's happening and respond accordingly, moment by moment. And you see that with the incredible courage of some people there who are, they're not falling apart, or maybe they eventually fall apart, maybe they do, it's so extreme, but people are doing what needs to be done right in front of them. A mother is searching for water for her child. A doctor is trying to do surgery with limited, surgical tools and so on. That the people, I think, survive best by being extremely present to just the moment they're in and dealing with that, and not being overwhelmed by the vastness of the whole thing. I think the vastness of the whole thing, sometimes we carry the past and the future too much, it's overwhelming. Sometimes it's best to just do what needs to be done. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on this, Carol.
Trying to unmute. Well, I appreciate what you just said. It was very grounding for me to hear those words from you. Thank you. Um, uh, I became reactive when I heard you saying, be completely receptive or something like that. Just receive what is happening. And I thought, yeah, there's a bomb. Just blew up my kid.
Yeah.
And I thought this Zen speak is pretty useless to these people. And I felt angry to hear you talking that way in this moment in history.
Yeah.
So, there is that, and there is the infinite regress of all of this generational trauma and dukkha going back to beginningless time, all the ancient twisted karma, and somehow living in this moment of awareness of that too.
Yeah.
Somehow or another, that does seem to me to be really huge. It's a huge demand that life makes of us, and if we shirk it, we're not fully present. And I feel right now very challenged by that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this teaching about acceptance, which is the metaphor of the mirror, receive everything without selecting, just receive it all, which is a way of talking about acceptance, I think is one that we do have to be very careful how we understand it, because as you say, it's certainly, if we were to use it in such a way as to be complacent about suffering in the world, then clearly that can't be the Buddha's teaching.
No.
So I think for me, what I have found helpful with this is, in the first instance, fully receive exactly what is happening. Just actually see it fully for what it is first, and then work out how to proceed next. And I think it's an important distinction, because what a lot of people have a tendency to do is something starts happening and they they overlay their opinion about it or their interpretation of it before they've actually been fully present to it. And they already decide on an action before they've seen what's going on fully. And when we do that, then we're less skillful, because we're not responding to what's going on, we're responding to our idea of what's going on. So this image of the mirror is to first, and it has to take less than a second. It's not like it has to take a lot of time. It's an attitude of receptivity, an attitude of, okay, I'll hear what's being said to me right now. Like just for you speaking then, just my job was to fully hear what you said and not start to prepare, what am I going to say to Carol after she finishes? If I was doing that, then I wouldn't have been listening, So first I needed to just listen, like totally, completely 100%, like a mirror. And then, only then, go, what could I say now that makes sense for me as a practitioner, as a student of the Dharma? Yeah, I really appreciate your openness and bringing up something very difficult. But one other thing I do want to say about this is I have great and total faith that the Dharma is applicable everywhere. Like there isn't a circumstance where it can't be of benefit. And I really do feel that. I have had some rather awful things happen in my life, and Dharma, the teachings haven't failed me. They haven't failed me. And it kind of feels like it has to be that way because it's sort of a universal teaching. So there can't be a situation where it doesn't apply, because somehow that would feel it's a conditioned teaching. Just like the teaching of Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, it doesn't pervade 95%. And it's not like only 98% of people have Buddha nature. It's like it's everywhere, but it's not. People often don't see it in themselves and in others. So it's just our delusions that get in the way. But the Dharma, the essential truths are applicable under every circumstance. Yeah. Yeah. We have a bit more time if anyone else would like to share your thoughts.
Hey, Neti.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me personally, in my journey, that mention of the pause, basically coming after some period of practice and understanding the settling, to pick up that delusion popping up in your mind. I mean, just to see that, right? And then taking that pause, just like you did with Carol right there. She said something, you received it, and then there was some quiet. And then I could feel you coming back with your heart, not with a reaction. Oh my God, how are you challenging me as a speaker or something? I mean, there was room for Carol, right? And there was room for you. So yeah, that just ability to pick up what your ideas are, how you were saying that, what I'm making it up and all that piece and running with that, which is kind of this poison, as opposed to paying attention to the buildings on fire, or, it's raining, whatever it may be, to be really here, really be present, right? And how that pays off, actually, like you say, it's the remedy, whatever the situation is, right? You open your heart and then you move forward and do what needs to be done. And to me, the deeper piece is just this practice facilitates that realization, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if we think about what do people like? They like other people to pay attention to them. That's what we like.
Why not give it to yourself? Right.
What was that?
You give it to yourself, pay attention to yourself. I mean, that's kind of what you're saying in that pause, right?
Yeah, but also just on a simple level, you know, if someone speaks and we give our attention to them when they speak, like we're fully giving our attention, we're not sort of giving our attention to them, they really like it. And I really like it when I say something and someone listens to me, not that I'm trying to convince them of anything or anything like that, just that they're actually giving this kind of incredible gift of just being with me in the present moment, just being with me in this present moment. I think all of us like that. We see that with children, of course, like, look at me, look at me. Children love it. They love it, but adults love it too. And I think maybe that's like an indication, this idea that if we are functioning in a truly happy way, I mean that in a sort of a deep kind of happy way, not just a superficial happy way. If we have that feeling of happiness and we're conveying that feeling or bringing out that feeling in others, then we're probably being really skillful, because that is being in accord with reality. Like when we're in accord with reality that we can't understand, but we can be in accord with it, we're naturally at ease. This is one of the sort of teachings, that we're naturally at ease, which, just going back to what you were saying, Carol, that doesn't mean that we're in the middle of an extreme crisis. We can't just be at the ease completely in the midst of an extreme crisis. Like if we're being bombed, we can't be just at ease, but we can be in a kind of a flow where we are just responding wholeheartedly to whatever we need to respond to. We give ourselves fully in that moment. But overall, I think a sense of, when we're functioning in accord with reality, there is a kind of a joyous ease that we have. Yeah. Jack?
Hi, Nettie. Hi, everyone. Yeah, well, it's kind of like with these situations where we are constantly hearing about what's happening to people, we're kind of can be experiencing like a sort of secondary trauma in a way. We sort of are. It's like we're all traumatized at the moment about war and all these sorts of things. It's really difficult. Sometimes it's difficult to see, you know, how does the teaching apply?
Yeah. And when that thought comes up for you, Jack, do you have doubt that the teaching doesn't apply?
Well, it's just that I have to accept that there are things I can't fix. That there's you know, sickness, old age, death is part of life, you know. And I can't change war in Gaza. Like I can't pretend that I can change it, you know. What can I do, you know? I mean, really directly or powerfully, not very much. All I can do is but yeah, but you don't want to be like cold about it as well. So because that's not it's like feeling compassion about it. Yeah, I don't know, I can't really explain. I get stuck on this a lot, actually. This thing of like feeling compassion and not being able to do anything.
Yeah. Well, maybe a couple of thoughts that come up for me when you say that is feeling compassion is an action already, just that you feel that, and that you remain open-hearted with all the pain and all the injustice, is an action. I mean, it's not nothing. It's already something, because it's creating the conditions of how you're going to be in the next moment, and how you're going to be with the next person that you talk to, how you'll be with your sons, or how you'll be with neighbors, or, you know. So it's already something to feel compassion, because, as we know, people often don't. People often don't feel compassion. They just say, got to get rid of them. You know, people do that. So having compassion is incredibly valuable, right there. It's creating conditions for how you're going to be in your next moment, and ongoing. So so that's one thought. And the other thought too is, if we think of everything as profoundly interconnected and interdependent, then even if I'm not taking any direct action in relation to Gaza, for example, I am taking action in relation to other things. And as there is no actual boundary between everything, the boundary is an appearance, the functional appearance, but in essence, there isn't actually a boundary. Well, then I am being beneficial. It's just not going to be by the time the ripple reaches all the way to Gaza, it won't be felt by anyone, probably. But with all of us doing whatever it is that we do, in whichever way we're being beneficial in the world, it is all rippling, because there's no boundary. So we can have faith in that. I think it's important that we do, because otherwise we can then feel overwhelmed. And then if we are overwhelmed and we do start to be traumatized, then we're not being able to be as beneficial, because we're having to deal with the internal, you know, upset in our body.
Yeah.
So we're benefiting others by acting in a way and understanding our own thoughts and our own actions in a way that doesn't lead us to feel disempowered and useless, or the various things that people think.
Yeah. And I suppose, you know, like, you know, sometimes just grieving is an appropriate response.
Yeah.
Grieving the stupidity in the world, the immense stupidity.
Yes.
Not just with the wars and stuff that around us all the time. No.
Climate change, social injustice, broken economic systems. It just goes.
The unnecessary, you know, harm, unnecessary suffering, and all of that. It's just sometimes just need to grieve it and come to terms with it in a way. It sort of deepens our capacity for compassion, and you know, to be citizens who can engage fruitfully with whatever we do. You know, we're able to open our heart and feel it and grieve.
Yeah.
Not kind of bypass or whatever, you know.
Yes.
Really deeply process it, understand human delusion, understand how we all screw up. And then also, like, recognize when I'm causing harm. When am I causing harm, you know? And that's something I can do, is to really try and recognize that. Not just pretend that there's baddies out there doing it all. And I've never, you know, I've never heard or anything, you know, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it is tricky because, you know, people want to know, like, you know, like when I go to the prison and talk to people, just like to them, a lot of what you say just sounds like such, you know, horseshit from a privileged person, you know, and they'll say that. They'll just say, you know, what planet are you from? It's not the same one as me.
Mm. I guess that's also what we're called to do, is to find the appropriate response to each situation. And
Yeah.
giving a talk like this at the prisons probably would not be
Yeah, or whatever.
go
Yeah.
down so well. You know,
Yeah.
you'd frame it differently. And that's just being very attentive to what's in front, and what like trying to get a sense of what would be useful here, rather than
Yeah.
I've got
Yeah,
this
I
idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just going back to what you said a bit earlier, Jack, I'm often really appreciate that the Buddha's first teaching was dukkha. For a long time, I just felt a bit annoyed. Like, I know I get that. Why isn't Buddha nature more interesting? Like, but no, over the years now, it's like, oh yeah, that was the first thing he taught. There is suffering. There's a cause of suffering. There's a path to be liberated from suffering. And this is the path. You know, it's basically an ethical path. That was his first teaching, and yeah.
Mm. But it seems simpler than it is. It sounds
That's
simpler.
right. Yes. Yes, right. That's right. It's very subtle. That's right. That's why we have to practice for years and years and years, because we think we get it, and then just drops down a notch. It's a little more subtle than I thought.
Yeah, and I think the thing that can be tricky is just, it's fine. Like I can see, say, craving, like I want my child to do such and such, and they don't want to. You know, that's pointless, right? I think I know what's best for them or something. And they're in their 20s now and they don't care what I think or whatever, right? That's kind of more obvious, right? That's more obvious than knowing, than taking in all the information about what's happening in the world and processing it in a constructive way. That's harder. But then you don't want to kind of just, well, I don't want to kind of just like try and whitewash everything and go, oh, that's just me wanting things to not be as they are, so that's craving. I don't know. That just sounds like a cheap shot in a way. You know, like, oh, I don't want there to be war. That's just my craving. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yes.
It's obvious sometimes if I want my child to study something at uni and they don't want to, that's more obvious.
Yeah.
But me not wanting other people to suffer is different. You know, it's a deeper thing.
Yeah.
And that's relates to the bodhisattva thing and all that. Anyway, I've hogged the airtime. Anyone else want to say anything? Thank you.
Welcome. It's good that you don't want people to suffer. We just have to do it in a way that we don't make ourselves suffer too much, so that we get immobilized, because that's not useful. Yeah.
Well, just circling back to everything's been said, is if you truly observe your own compassion and you feel how it feeds you, and it will grow, right? And you let go of the idea that I have control, but you do what needs to be done. And like you say, or like you mentioned earlier, when it truly needs to be done, there's a completeness in that as well. And it's not about me, and it's not about a thought or whatever, you know, and that that we can develop more capacity for compassion and for action in a true-hearted way, no matter what's going on around us, because it's in our heart, right? It's in our truth, so.
Yeah. I know we're at the end of time, but I just want to say one last thing in relation to, knowing about wars and so on. That one thing I think is helpful is if we see ourselves in every single player in these conflicts, that we may have a tendency towards more empathy for one particular side, and that's fine. There's often good reason for that. But to not fail to see ourselves in the perpetrators and in all the bystanders and all the minor contributors, to really sort of on a very subtle and deep level, but very genuinely see, if I had all of the conditions that they have had, I would act in the same way. It's an important teaching, and if you haven't come across that teaching, it's really one to look at very closely, because what it does when we look at that very closely, it helps us realize that it's an arrogance to think that somehow we are more ethical and we are more moral, and that if we had exactly the same life as them, we'd somehow rise up better than that person. But if we really had all the conditions of that person's life, we may very well act in the same way. And I think if we can think that way, so in other words, we keep ourselves open-hearted to everyone, which doesn't mean we don't say, I think what they're doing is wrong and harmful. It doesn't stop us having a view, but we just do it with no malice towards any individual player. I just think this idea of to have no malice towards anyone makes it more possible to hold the suffering in the world. But it's not an easy practice. It's a very challenging practice. It's a very challenging practice, but I would encourage you to consider it. It relieves us of a lot of suffering when we have no malice towards anyone, even when they're super harmful. All right, well, thank you for tolerating me. Phil, pass it over to you.
Thank you, Neti.
Okay. Well,
just before Phil starts, I'll just say the Dharma is freely given with no requests, but Neti is giving her time. And if anybody feels the generosity of Dana pulled towards offering money towards Neti or Neti Sangha, it is always welcome and always supportive to support the Dharma. Thank you, Phil. Sorry.
No, not at all. I have no instruments here, so I'm going to do the Heart Sutra more in a reading mode, and carry on as usual otherwise. The great Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, practicing deep Prajna Paramita, clearly saw that all 5 skandhas are empty, transforming all suffering and distress. Shariputra, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly form. Sensation, perception, mental reaction, consciousness are also like this. Shariputra, all things are essentially empty, not born, not destroyed, not stained, not pure, without loss, without gain. Therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no sensation, perception, mental reaction, consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no color, sound, smell, taste, touch, object of thought, no seeing, and so on to no thinking, no ignorance, and also no ending of ignorance, and so on to no old age and death, and also no ending of old age and death. No suffering, cause of suffering, cessation, path, no wisdom, and no attainment. Since there is nothing to attain, the bodhisattva lives by prajna paramita, with no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance and therefore no fear. Far beyond delusive thinking, right here is nirvana. All Buddhas of past, present, and future live by prajna paramita, attaining anuttara samyak sambodhi. Therefore know that prajna paramita is the great sacred mantra, the great vivid mantra, the unsurpassed mantra, the supreme mantra which completely removes all suffering. This is truth, not mere formality. Therefore set forth the prajna paramita mantra. Set forth this mantra and proclaim gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi svaha. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here now. Whenever we send forth these invocations, they are perceived and subtly answered. We give thanks to Shakyamuni Buddha, Dai Sho, to all our ancestors, and to the unknown, unnamed women. May we wake up to our true nature, together with redwoods and salmon, and the many beings of the world. We dedicate our sutras and our zazen to those who are sick or suffering, to the victims of war in Ukraine and Gaza, and to Mara, Jerry Bell, Fred Berry, Patty Blackmore, Cynthia Blashfield, Cynthia Changaris, Henry Changaris, James Changaris, John Changaris, Kevin Fisher-Paulson, Flavio Flaviani, Carol Fleming, Linda Greenman, Shauna Ianson, Anne Jacopetti, Wendy LeBleu, Wendy Loze, Jandamara Ole, Rajendra Parajuli, Neti Mushin Parekh, Anne-Marie Petrokubi, Tom Pfister, Gary Pearson, Mary Frost Pearson, Hamdi Khalid Kudai and his family, Dorothy Smith, Ed Solt, Carol Spooner, Joan Sutherland, John Tarrant, Ahimsa Wonderwheel, Mira Wonderwheel, Lauren Wyckoff, Adriana Zadunowski. May you be whole. And we dedicate the merits to those who have recently died. Kyoki Roberts Roshi, Martha Hutton, Susan McCarthy, Suraj Parajuli. May you rest in deepest samadhi. May we dispel greed, hatred, and ignorance as we practice, realize, and manifest the enlightened way together. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, the great prajna paramita. The four great vows. The many beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. Dharma gates are countless. I vow to wake to them. The Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to embody it fully. The many beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. Dharma gates are countless. I vow to wake to them. The Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to embody it fully. The many beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. Dharma gates are countless. I vow to wake to them. The Buddha way is unsurpassed. I vow to embody it fully.
You've reached the phone number.
Mike?
All right. Well, thank you all for your practice and Nettie for your talk. We will have another speaker next week. And hopefully by then I will be ahead of the game and will be able to share with you the way this is going. I'm sorry I've been a little bit behind the eight ball this week. So I'm grateful to be with you all. And look forward to seeing. And Nettie, just so deeply appreciate you and your practice. It's a tremendous gift.
You've reached the phone number for Annie
Make
Taylor.
my life. Be well, everyone.
To donate, what would be the best way to donate?
If you go to the Twining Vines website, oh, sorry, Nettie.
Perfect. I'll figure it out.
I'll send out an email to the Zendo group just so that everyone has it. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nettie. Good
All
night. everyone.
right.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you, Nettie.
Thank you, Nettie. And all.